There we go. We have lift off. So welcome to Wetwheels Yorkshire Live, our second edition. Thank you for those that joined us and watched our first one that was on dolphins. Today we're going to talk about whales, and again we're going to try and keep it Yorkshire orientated. Just to explain, we had some feedback from our friends Wetwheels on the south coast, and they were desperate to point out that they do get dolphins occasionally, and they even sent a video of a minke whale, but it was about a 10-year-old video, and it was a little tiny baby minke. And I think my response was that all the cod eat them up here if they're that small. So, so with us today, well, I'm Pete from Wetwheels Yorkshire. We've got Bex Lynham, if you would like to.
Hi, everyone.
And introduce yourself. What's your role, Bex?
Sorry, yeah, I'm Bex, and I work for Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, and I'm the Marine Advocacy Officer.
Super. And Graham Oliver, apart from being a Wetwheels crew.
Hi, yeah, Graham Oliver, enthusiastic amateur. Got involved in a lot of cetacean surveys with a charity called Marine Life. So very thrilled to see these beasts on the north coast of Yorkshire.
Brilliant. And Joanne, hi there,
Hi.
Joanne. You've been on the boat with us a number of times now, I think. A couple of times. Just the once, all right.
It feels like number
To you or us. Yeah.
probably you.
Yeah, so you're a writer, and you have a wonderful blog, Poorly Parents, Mummy with MS, and a young son. And your hubby Dave celebrated a big birthday last week, didn't he?
Yeah. So I involved that.
And then we've got Lauren Fordham. How are you today,
Hello.
Lauren?
I'm good, thanks.
And you do a blog as well, don't you? Have you been doing much of it lately?
Not in a while, but it's opportunity to get back to it and be able to blog about my experience of trips on Wetwheels Yorkshire, including being the first whale watching trip. So,
How many whales did we see?
0.
So that's Lauren in charge of Wetwheels whale watching trips marketing. And then, of course, last but not least, I was going to play the Mission Impossible music or something like that, but Whitby's answer to Tom Cruise, Dale Milne.
Everyone.
How are you doing, Dale?
Not too bad, not too bad.
Good. And Dale, of course, has been on a number of Wetwheels trips. And he does hold the record for the biggest fish ever caught on Wetwheels, the most fish ever caught on Wetwheels in a day, and the one who's kicked his dad's butt the most on Wetwheels fishing. So pretty good, pretty cool. And in fact did national TV on Wetwheels, didn't you? So
Yeah, I've kind of been around the boat with Wetwheels now quite a bit.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So the format today, for those that haven't joined us before, we're going to have a bit of a presentation, and Bex is going to give us some great information on Wales and in the context of Yorkshire. We're also going to have a bit of a prize draw, or at least a competition. So at the end of this, I'm going to ask a question from today's talk. Anybody that wants to send a question in live can do so via Facebook Messenger. And if we ask one of your questions, we'll actually put you in the draw. We'll draw that a bit later. So without further ado, Bex, I'll hand over to you. And yeah, let's go.
Great, thanks, Pete. Well, hi everyone. The first thing I wanted to say is Happy World Oceans Day. There's no better day to be talking about whales than today. And I think before I start telling you a little bit about more whales in the North Sea, I actually want to ask you guys a question. So don't tell the answer straight away. If you're watching on Facebook, then maybe write the answer in the comments. Can anyone tell us what whales you think that we do get here in the North Sea? Any common species that we might get, or one that you know has been seen in this area? If you know, just type the answer in the Facebook comments box. And in the meantime, I'm going to tell you a little bit about more about whales generally. So there's a couple of different types of whales. We've got the toothed whales, which are exactly as they sound. They've got teeth. So that's things like sperm whales, belugas, narwhals. And they actively hunt things like fish and squid and other sea creatures. And then we've got the baleen whales. So for anyone that was just watching as everyone kind of joined, Pete was playing that video and you saw a really good shot of the baleen plates in that whale's mouth, which was fantastic. And essentially yeah, there it is, thanks Pete. So they've got these baleen plates in their mouths and they use that to sieve their prey from the seawater. So it's a really strong but flexible material. It's a bit like our fingernails, the same substance. And so they use that baleen to sieve their prey, so things like small fish and krill, from the water, and they use their tongue to force the water through the baleen plates and back out into the sea, and then the whale swallows. And some of them can eat as much as 1,300 kilograms of small animals in a day, which is pretty phenomenal. Certainly things like humpbacks and grey whales. Some baleen whales can open their mouths by as much as 90 degrees. So I don't know if anyone else can open their mouth by that amount, but I definitely can't. So I can talk a lot, but I can't get it this wide. So it's pretty impressive. So they obviously have to take a big gulp from the water to get so much out of the seawater from the ocean. Some of the can't quite manage that, but they push through around 3,000 litres of water a second, so absolutely phenomenal quantities. Now, there's a really obvious difference between baleen and toothed whales aside from what's in their mouths, and that's the number of blowholes that they have. So when we talk about blowholes, we're talking about they're just nostrils, but they've got them on the top of the head, essentially. And the difference between them is that baleen whales have two, whereas toothed whales have one. And they have them because whales are mammals just like us and have to breathe air, so that's what they breathe through. Now the toothed whales, they have an extra sense that we don't have, which makes them really intriguing. So toothed whales use echolocation to hunt and to navigate underwater. So it can be pretty dark underwater at times, especially when you're very deep. So echolocation helps them to navigate. And it basically works by bouncing high-pitched clicking sounds off the underwater objects that they're encountering. And the sounds are made because it squeezes the air through their nasal passages near the blowhole. So baleen whales, that's the one with the plates in their mouth. They don't use echolocation, but they do make other sounds to communicate with one another. So Pete, you were playing them before we started, weren't you? Do you want to play one of those noises, the humpback?
The humpback, we'll go with Mr. Humpback.
Yeah. I think he sounds like other animals as well, to be honest.
Yeah.
Different whales make lots of different noises, so things like singing and moaning and short pulses, so lots and lots of different noises. Just a couple of what I thought were interesting random facts on whales as well, is now whales, they do have ears. Just don't look like ours. They haven't got these big flappy things on the side of their head. Their ears are internal, so they don't have this open ear canal. They also still have ear wax, and well, that sounds, we're not. That ear wax can actually be really useful to scientists, as gross as we might find that. So they can harvest the earwax from whales that have died, and they can use it to tell them more about their diet and their hormone levels from when the whale was alive. So scientists are using whale earwax just like tree rings, essentially, which is pretty fascinating, I think, at least.
Have you ever heard of that thing? Is it Horrible Henry's History or something like that? We're turning into that at the moment, aren't we? That's gross. But
Yeah, well, that's the first gross fact.
I
Wait
don't
for the
know,
second.
more.
Yeah.
So there's more. All the cool stuff's gross. So the second gross thing to know about that whale poop is pretty cool as far as we're concerned. It's good for the planet. Now, the reason that it is because whale poop brings nutrients to the surface. So it acts a little bit like a fertilizer. And because it acts like fertilizer, it multiplies phytoplankton, which is essentially the base of the food chain. Lots and lots of other animals eat it. And that's because it contains iron and nitrogen, which is what phytoplankton needs to grow. So that produces oxygen. So the more whales that we have, the more oxygen we have, which is, of course, a really good thing. That's what we need to breathe. At the same time, it's also able to capture that phytoplankton produced by the whale poop, is able to capture a lot of carbon dioxide, which is what's contributing to climate change. So whales are also really good for helping to change. So I thought that was a pretty cool fact that whale poop can help us mitigate against climate change. So I thought it worth mentioning.
Yeah, that is cool.
So,
I'll concede that that's a really cool fact. Beck.
yeah, you wouldn't ever think that whale poop could be so useful, would you? So
Yeah, you learn something new every day.
yeah, do look it up. It's actually a process called the whale pump. So if you just Google that, you would find out a little bit more about that process. Somewhat that it can be explained a little bit more eloquently than I can do so. But it's pretty cool. So coming back to that question that I asked before, I don't know if anyone's written anything, Pete, about what they think we might have in the North Sea in the way of species. Or does our panel know?
We did have a cut-off at some point there on the technology, but we are back on. So I won't ask you to go through a whole lot again. So no, at this moment we haven't had
okay.
flurry of questions, but
that's okay. Does anyone on our panel know
Yeah.
any species that we might get in the North Sea? Doesn't matter if you don't.
Minke and humpback.
Yeah. Well done, Lauren. That's correct, exactly. Yeah. So minke is probably the one that we see most commonly in the North Sea. So I'll tell you a little bit more about minke whales. Now, there's a couple of species of minke whale. We get common and Antarctic. So you won't be surprised to hear that the one that we get is the common minke whale. And they can be pretty hard to spot unless they're breaching, i.e. jumping out of the water, because they don't raise their tails when they dive, what we call their flukes. They don't raise them, and they're not as acrobatic as some other whale species, so they can be difficult to spot, although we have seen plenty in the North Sea. Do you want to play that video, Pete?
I'll do the very quick one initially.
Yeah. So when you see a minke whale, this is what you see.
Now I'll play that one again. It's obviously a very short clip, that one, but we kind of like that clip because that was one taken last year with a trip with kids from Martin House Hospice on. So it has a lot of special meaning for us. It's wonderful anytime seeing whales out on the sea, but to share that experience with a group like Martin House is amazing. We've got a better one here, which, just bear with me a moment, I'll share this one. So we've got that there, we've got a group waiting there, cameras poised.
So it's a pretty quick view, but it's a spectacular one, isn't it? You never forget the moment you see your first whale, so it's wonderful to see.
And the reality is that what we're seeing there is from quite a distance away. They are an inquisitive creature, aren't they? They do approach boats. They're certainly not phased. I think as Wetwheels Yorkshire, our closest encounters Well, for those that know that Whitby Bellboy, we had a whale, a minke dive almost near the Bellboy, which isn't far offshore, and that was probably 30 feet away from the boat. And another time we had a group fishing with us, fishing off North Nab, so just on the edge of Robin Hood's Bay there.
The nearest I've seen, Peter, was 15 metres outside the harbour.
Really?
Wow.
Out in a yacht, and the minke came just next to us.
Wow, what unforgettable experience. Gosh, you can't imagine seeing them that close to shore, can you?
It was
So here's some better footage, Bex.
Say again?
So here's some better footage shared
Oh,
now,
yeah.
Minky. You want to talk us through that one?
Yes, this is really great footage because it gets close enough to show you one of the more distinctive features of the minke whale. So can you see its flippers have got that really strong white armband on? So that is a really distinctive feature of minke whales. And you can see they're a kind of dark brownish colour underneath on their bellies. They're a bit more light grey. But the most distinctive feature, I think, at least, is those flippers. If you know it does come to that close to you, that is. They've got a really kind of pointed. Long pointed snout, and that gives them real speed and endurance, around 20 to 22 miles an hour, and that's pretty important actually, because they can be preyed on by other species, specifically orcas, so it pays to be quick. I mean, we normally see them as individuals or maybe in small groups, but big groups have been recorded elsewhere in the world, but generally they're sighted on their own. They are one of the smaller whale species, but small's a relative term, isn't it? So they still reach 7 to 10 meters. So I wouldn't think of that as small as if it pulled up next to me in the water. So still pretty big as far as we're concerned, but a small whale by whales. And they don't start. Sorry, Pete, go on.
Just really to compare the sizes, because that is the determining, or the factor that most people think about whales is the size. So bottom right there, we've got the minke whale, which looks positively dinky, doesn't it, compared? Am I right in thinking they're up to about 10 tons?
The minke whales?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I know, because humpbacks are about 30 tons. So probably something within that region.
Yeah, 6 to 8 according to my little chart there, so I was maybe a bit optimistic. So compared with the blue whale, I have no knowledge of any blue whales in the North Sea. That's is that correct? They're not a species that we would normally or ever see?
I'm not aware of them being recorded here. It's possible that they have, but a very, very rare occurrence, if ever.
Yeah, it comes back to the depth of the sea, really, Peter. The bigger the whale, typically, not always, but they need a bigger space to move in. So the minke is quite comfortable in the shallow waters of the North Sea, but the blue whale, I mean, who's to say never recorded here, but it'd be unlikely, certainly down at Yorkshire level because of the water depth.
So we'll stop that share there. Get rid of that one. So anybody on the panel got any questions at this stage then?
Yeah. So in terms of, like, you say the minke whales would you say they like socially isolate themselves for like predatory reasons, so like they don't get all caught out at once, or is it sort of like a parental sort of like upbringing? They break away from like the parents like at an early age, or what causes them to like be solitary, really?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dale, and I guess depends on, you know, very much the social structure of the whales. So we talked a lot about bottlenose dolphins last week, didn't we? And how there's a lot of roles that are played by different members of the group there. So kind of grandmas will look after the juveniles, for example. And it seems like that's perhaps less the case with a species like the minke whale. They perhaps don't have that reliance or the need for other adults to play those roles. So yeah, it's a really good question, and in all honesty, I don't know entirely why they are a more solitary species than others, but I can only assume that it's that they don't have that reliance on, in terms of caregiving, for example, that other species do, and other functions, of course.
Might have something to do with food availability as well, because if you had a big squad of minkies going down the coast, they're going to hoover up the food pretty quickly.
Yeah.
You
So
didn't
how?
have a fishing boat in Whitby, did you, Graham?
Yeah, and it's a good question as well, Dale, because I think Lauren rightly mentioned that we do have humpbacks visiting the North Sea as well, and we don't. These are, again, they're not a really common sight at all, but every year we get a handful of sightings of humpback whales. So it's a shame that they only turn up a few times a year, or at least that's how many times they're seen. But when they do, they often hang around, sometimes for a couple of days. And as far as I'm aware, it's only been one or two that's ever been spotted at once. Certainly, I know they've been seen off Flamborough Head, and they'll hang out there for a couple of days, obviously feeding. So again, they are another species that's able to, that's quite relatively solitary in nature.
You've mentioned that orcas feed on minke whales. Have any orcas been sighted in the UK or in Yorkshire?
Yeah, that's another really good question, Lauren. So we do get orcas in the UK. Primarily, they're spotted right off the north coast of Scotland, but we do see them a bit further south. And I think it was only about a month ago that there was a confirmed sighting of orcas off the Northumberland coast. So it does seem as if they are making occasionals further down here. As far as I'm aware, that's certainly not a common thing at this point in time. But yeah, you can definitely see them in UK waters. So every year, Sea-Watch Foundation, who's a partner that we work with on recording cetaceans, they run Orca Watch at the end of May every year, which they haven't been able to do this year, unfortunately. But they dedicate a whole week to orca spotting right the north of Scotland. What's the furthest most point away? What do you call it? John O'Groats, that's it, right up there.
So I'm just going to quickly show that video we did show for those that joined us really early. As we're talking about orcas. And again, just to clarify, we do know that they're not whales, that they are a species of dolphin. So again, like as we would associate with dolphin, and particularly bottlenose dolphin, are really quite a social creature.
Are you able to?
Sorry, yeah, go on.
I'm just wondering if you could share one of the humpback videos, Pete.
Absolutely, yes.
It'd be good to just take a look at one of those things, because humpbacks are quite, unlike minkies, who are not very acrobatic, humpbacks are a really acrobatic species, and you see lots and lots of them displaying lots of different behaviours. There's a lot of peck slapping and tail slapping and head slapping from humpbacks. Now, and it's pretty impressive as well, because their pectoral fins are around a third of the length of their body. So they're absolutely huge, and they'll slap the water to stun fish, to eat. Obviously, they use them for swimming, and use them to regulate their body temperature. So hopefully you might be able to see those massive fins in some of these videos.
Yeah.
Now this
is a video you took, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a video I took. I have to admit, also not in the North Sea. But this video is really cool, because this is actually a baby. So it looks huge, but this is a baby humpback. and he is really moving a lot, because they don't, because he's a juvenile and he's working out his environment, but they don't have to consume energy like their mother does. The mother's just given birth to them, and she hasn't eaten for months when she's given birth to her calf. So she needs to be moving much more slowly and saving energy. Meanwhile, he's suckling milk at 35% fat, so he can afford to move a lot more. So he'll have a lot of fun.
And just to stay on the same theme, we'll show the other humpback video, which is again, I think, from the same trip. But it does show as well that they are inquisitive. They're not afraid to come near a boat.
Yeah, really amazing species. So humpbacks are true ocean wanderers. They can travel thousands and thousands of miles every single year, and they basically undertake a seasonal migration. So they come from more the polar regions where the water is absolutely full of food, and move down to tropical waters to breed and to give birth. And the reason that we think that they do that is because although there's a lot more food available in the kind of cold polar regions, that's quite a challenging and risky environment for a vulnerable newborn whale to be in. So we think that they might make that absolutely huge migration so that they can give birth to the calves in tropical waters, where it's warmer and calmer. So it's a bit like a kind of a nursery area, really.
Cool. We've actually got a couple of questions coming in now. I'm aware that we had a few little hiccups with Facebook Live. We'll be writing to Mark Zuckerberg. We've got one here from Janet. Could we see anything from the piers at Whitby? Well, I think you probably answered that one, Graham.
Yeah, well, it's certainly from my experience of living in the Whitby area for 9 years and being a sailor in the local waters, say I've seen minke within 15 feet, 15 meters or so of the end of the eastern pier, and although typically the minkies that we do get to see are by the yellow boats that go whale watching are often about 4 miles offshore, just straight north of the beach there, but anywhere in between. And most of the time you see them inshore, one assumes they're just following fish.
Yeah, I think one of the things to point out there, Janet, is that Whitby is the only place in England that runs regular whale watching trips during the summer, and they have a very high success rate when we get into August, September time. But the other thing I would point out, I think you'll back me up on this one, Dale, probably the best place to view the dolphins when we saw them from the boat last year will have been stood on the pier, because they were absolutely between the pier and the beach. And I think that actually it looked like they'd corralled fish because the birds were having a frenzy as well.
Yeah.
They are smart. I think they corralled a bunch of fish into between the piers and the beach and had a barbecue, or the dolphin equivalent. Any other questions from the panel at the minute?
We could ask which time of year to see whale, but you answered it, Pete.
I think there's more to that question, actually, Joanne. It's a great question, but Bex, do you want to expand on that in terms of the work we're doing as Wetwheels with the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it is a really good question, Joanne, and to answer it, we think from the data that we have, which is relatively limited, but as we understand it, we kind of see the minkies mainly between around July and September, although they are seen earlier than that. It can be in April, May. And what Pete's talking about is the fact that we're running monthly surveys out of Whitby, right out to 15 nautical miles. So they're dedicated surveys to see basically what we see, because we make a lot of assumptions that species are or aren't around at certain times of year, and it's often based on, you know, maybe a limited amount of survey work that we're able to do from the shore. It's really difficult to research whales and dolphins. It takes a lot of time and energy. So what we're hoping is that the surveys tell us a little bit more about what you can see at different times of the year, and even if they just confirm that yes, in the winter we didn't see anything, then that's, you know, that's fine. We've learned something. But we did see some white-beaked dolphins in February, didn't we? So we were quite pleased. There's still lots to see right through the year.
Okay. It would be the best place to see whales.
In terms of Whitby,
Yeah, it would be the best place to see whales in Yorkshire.
more specifically on board Wetwheels Yorkshire, of course.
It is good if you can get out to sea. That is a really good idea, because the minke whales do tend to be that bit further offshore, and you can sit on the land and take a pair of binoculars with you, which is a great idea if you've got, you know, it's good weather, calm conditions, and you've got the time. There's nothing better than just sitting and watching the sea, and you might get lucky. If you can go on a boat, though, that is a great thing to do. But those cliffs just north of Whitby are a really good place to sit and watch, because you're pretty elevated. So good spot for watching.
Not too close to the edge, though, guys.
Very far from the edge, obviously.
I think there's another potential advantage of Whitby in terms of whale watching from the coast, because if they travel down from the north, basically the coast goes in at Hartlepool, comes back out at Whitby, and then drops off down south. So depending on where the movement is, it's very likely almost to be a pinch point in bringing them closer in at the point where the land comes out at Whitby. So I think there is a topographical reason why potentially it's a good place to spot them.
Okay.
And I think that it also helps that Whitby, you don't have to go too far offshore until you're getting into deeper water, about 50, 60 metres. Whereas Bridlington, for example, whilst they do see whales there, it's 10 or 15 metres for a long way until you get into the deeper water. So the chance of seeing them stood on the beach at Bridlington are probably zero. Although if you get up to the height of Benton Cliffs, I think the other thing, they saw something interesting there a couple of weeks ago, did they not, from Benton Cliffs?
Sure.
Yeah, got a whale shark sighting, didn't they? Which is fantastic. So they're relatively rare in this area. You get them more commonly in other areas of the UK, sort of off the Cornish coast and off the Isle of Man and west coast of Scotland. But we don't have that many sightings, relatively speaking, off the Yorkshire coast. So how wonderful to spot one of these giants, the second biggest fish in the sea. So wonderful.
Yeah, that's cool. I've got a couple of questions. How old are they before they get to full-grown size? Now, I think this is a general whale as opposed to minke specifically, or is what sort of age range? I know they have a long gestation period.
Well, minkies, so the figures for minkies in terms of, well, gestation period is 10 to 11 months roughly. When a minkie is born, it's already about 3 meters. So it's already a big whale. So they reach maturity roughly between 3 and 8 years old. So a juvenile is anywhere, let's say, between 3 and 6 meters. But it's going to differ from, between males and females as well. So minkies get roughly up to about 10 meters. So I would say adults, males and females, are anywhere between 7 and 10 meters. So yeah, your range is 3 newborn to 10 meters fully grown.
That's cool. We've got a couple of shout outs. We've a hi from Chris Burrows, the Deputy Harbour Master.
Hi, Chris.
Hi.
and Joe Plant, one of our friends over at Whitby there. Any more questions on the panel here today?
I can ask, obviously, when you think about whales, you think about the size, but they're usually so big and they're usually grey or black. Is that because of the size? So that the fish don't see them?
So the colours of whales, what determines that, Bex?
Yeah, gosh, you've got some really great questions. I'm really racking my brain right now. Well, I tell you, the way I suppose I think about it is, let's think about where whales typically live. Now, whales, like many other species in the sea, are actually, they have what's the patterning called? It's counter shading. So on the top, they tend to be really dark, so that if something was looking at them from above, you're looking down onto the whale, it would blend in better. And then if something was looking at it from underneath the whale and looking up at its belly, it's much lighter. So that's more difficult for a predator to see, if that makes sense. So it's to do with perspective. And if we think about the different whale species as well, so think about belugas. Now we've got a video for that, haven't we, Pete?
We have. I knew you were coming to that. I knew
yeah,
you were.
you had your button paused, didn't you? Belugas are white, and there's a good reason for that. That's because of where they live. So belugas are a polar species of whale. They live in the Arctic, so they are surrounded by sea ice a lot of the time, and so it's very much in terms of blending in with that environment. So I think really that's it explains the reasons why whales are the colour they are, because often it's a lot about blending into their surroundings.
Yeah.
You were supposed to ask, how do we know how heavy they are, Joanne?
Really?
Yeah. So I can use my railway station joke.
Heavy on it.
Well, the old ones are the old ones. Anybody?
It's like the sailors used to say, isn't it? Whale meet again.
Oh, absolutely! Don't get me started, Graham. I've got a list of horrible jokes up here, so we're hoping not to resort to them.
Just going back to colouring slightly. The Cuvier's beak whale is another example, a bit like the beluga. It's a very deep water species, but you do see them, particularly going across Biscay often, they get brought up, and they're a very sort of brown and scarred looking thing. And that's because they live in the murky depths and colouring doesn't really matter.
Cool. Well, the other thing I'll point out, we'll just have a slight break from the talk. We did have a bit of a prize draw on the last event, and I'm pleased to say that we did pull a winner out the hat from the people that asked questions, and highly technical list, but Fliss, I will be in touch. Now, Fliss is a member of the Special Lioness group, and they're a lovely group that we met up in Northumberland, families with young children with various impairments. So what we've got for you there are 2 of our wonderful Wetwheels vouchers to take a trip on board the boat, and we're going to have the same little quiz today. So those that are sending questions in, we will put you in the draw. But not only do you get a pair of tickets, this is life size. We've got a humpback whale. So this will go to the winner who can answer the following question this time. So we showed a clip earlier of a minke whale, a very brief clip, and we talked about the local children's hospice that we were enjoying a trip with when we saw that minke earlier in 2019. So if you can either email or message the answer to that, we'll put you in the hat for them tickets and our lovely... It's definitely a humpback, that one, isn't it? Is it? We should have a name, but it's got to be a humpback with that sort of... What do we call that section there?
It's got the pleats
Okay.
So it's got to be, it's probably most likely to be a humpback whale. So we'll go with that.
Yeah,
Call it Humphrey.
I call it Henry the Humpback.
Call it Humphrey.
Henry the Humpback, but Humphrey
Henry the
sounds
Humpback. Well, we're starting to get into the realms of being corny now.
yeah.
So, on with humpbacks again. We'll show that little video for those that may have missed it, which is the signature move of a humpback whale, isn't it? This. There was a video of Whitby showing a humpback repeatedly breaching, but it was a number of years old and the quality was so poor that we didn't really feel it was appropriate to share it today. But that is the spectacular breach that a humpback can do. So the question there, Bex, is from me is, why do they do that?
Yeah, another really good question that, to be honest, I'm not sure the whale experts quite know the answer to, because we have this question about lots of species that breach. So it's not just whales that breach, other animals do as well. Things like rays, so manta rays breach, for example, and other species. So that's a really good question, and we honestly don't know the definitive answer. But a couple of suggestions are, so it's been suggested that there's it's some form of communication is the first one. Another is that's been put forward is that they are ridding their body of parasites in some way, which is possible. And the other one is just that they're having fun. So when I was lucky enough to film that footage of the humpbacks, the baby humpback whales breach over and over and over again, one after the other, and it looked like pure joy to me. It was certainly pure joy to watch. And as a highly intelligent species, as most cetaceans are, I think there's good reason to think that they are simply enjoying themselves. So that's 3 reasons. I don't know if there's any more that you're aware of, Graham, is there?
The one that strikes me with humpbacks isn't that the way they mate when they come together in the water? There's two bodies. So if you're demonstrating that you're worthy of breeding with, is there potential advantage of showing you're strong enough to do that? Don't know, it's just a thought.
Yeah,
well,
sure.
ties into a question that's just come in from Nona Lawton that says, what effort is actually needed to breach for a humpback to breach that far out of the water? Well, we can only guess, but it's got to be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we already talked about weight earlier, didn't we? And they're 30 tons. So the answer is certainly a lot. I mean, they've also seen those massive pectoral fins that they have to propel themselves through the water. So, they've clearly got the right equipment. And it's quite interesting as well. That when they're lunge feeding, which is what they do to catch that prey, and they open that mouth really wide, imagine the drag on that mouth trying to get that water. Now it turns out they only open that mouth the split second before they get the fish in the mouth or whatever it is they're going for, in order to reduce drag, of course. But yeah, quite a maneuver. I don't honestly know the answer, what kind of power is needed, except to say a lot.
No, I'd have to look it up. But if you also think that they're a big beast, so when they're in the water, they've got flotation, so they're not as heavy. As soon as they start leaving that water, their whole body becomes actually heavier to them. So it is a phenomenal effort to get out of the water like that.
I think one of the things that puts the size into context for me is it's nice to do a comparison. And when I was sort of doing my little bit of research into this, some of the comparisons, and blue whale being the biggest is the daddy of them all. First of all, the biggest creature ever on planet Earth. I think that is one of the stats. So dinosaurs, it dwarfs them. And I think a tongue the size of an elephant.
Yes.
Pretty much puts things into context, doesn't it? And a heart the size of a small car.
Is
So-
that a blue?
Yeah, and
Sorry, Lauren.
What kind of whale is that?
That's the blue whale. That's the big boy. That's the biggest.
I read that a small child could swim through the veins in the heart of a blue whale.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's quite big.
Not to be tried at home, folks.
No. Unless your name is Jonah.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, no, we've got some lovely comments coming through on Facebook, but I think we're running low on the questions at the moment. I think we've answered most of them. So, has anyone got anything they'd like to say in closing? Bex, you want to say a bit on World Oceans Day?
Yeah, well, just thank you to everyone for joining us. It is wonderful to actually talk whales and more specifically something about the sea on World Oceans Day. I don't always get the chance, so thank you for that. And thanks for having me, Pete. It really is great to talk whales, and hope to join you for another episode of this.
Absolutely. Graham, any closing remarks?
I'd just like to thank Bex, actually. Did a cracking job there. Thank you, Bex. And thank you, Pete, for organising it. And thanks, everyone on the panel. I find these things fascinating. I think the day when you see a dolphin or a whale in the water is just a day to smile. So let's all have more smiley days, please.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I should
Joanne?
also just mention,
Oh.
Pete, sorry, I just realised I forgot to make an acknowledgement, which is just to Sea Watch Foundation, who provided some of that footage for us that we work with on our surveying of
Yorkshire Coast
whales.
Nature.
Yeah, exactly. So Sea Watch Foundation is an organisation that we work with to do some of the research on cetaceans, and Yorkshire Coast Nature have provided some of the footage, and they do some of the whale watching trips to sea. So thank you to both of those for providing that imagery.
That's cool. So yeah, thank you, Joanne. Did you enjoy it today?
I did, thank you. I'm an oceans novice, so
Yep.
thank you for Bex and give me all the info.
You're very
Well, that's
welcome.
it. It's good to start from a position of, you know, wanting to expand all our knowledge, really. Dale?
Yeah, just to say it's been really nice to be back here again. It's really fun learning.
Brilliant.
Something that's easier to learn.
Has your mum been watching?
Yeah, they've been watching, same for the room. And quite funny enough, they were saying something as soon as I thought of it. Why didn't you have Dory on here? Giving us a bit of language lessons, learning how to speak well.
Yeah, you're right. We've missed a trick there, haven't we, Pete?
And Lauren, thank you for joining us. Have you enjoyed it?
Yeah, it's been brilliant seeing the footage and learning which whales you can see in Yorkshire. It's been really informative, and I'm sure I will keep going for as many trips as I can to Wetwheels until I actually see one.
Absolutely. Well, we are hoping if we can possibly do anything, we will try for later this year. Obviously, the current situation is making life very difficult for everybody, but keep watching our Facebook pages for updates. I'd also like to point out that imitation being the best form of flattery, Wetwheels Solent and the founder of Wetwheels as an organisation, Jeff Holt, is hosting a Facebook live stream with some of the participant groups from Wetwheels on the South Coast. So you might need a translator to understand they talk funny down south. But on a serious note, they're going to talk about the mental health issues that are surrounding isolation, and that is going out live on Wednesday. And we will send links. We'll put links on our Facebook page. So do take the opportunity to listen to Jeff. Jeff is an inspirational speaker, and as I say, he founded Wetwheels as an organisation. So that should be a good talk. And we will hopefully join everybody in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll schedule something else. So any ideas, please drop us an email and get in touch. But we'll say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.